March 24, 1352 BCE. The air within the walls of Akhenaten is dense with heat and uncertainty. As Princess Akhenaten stumbles backward, her heart racing, the golden facade of her father's palace glitters mockingly in the sunlight, a harsh contrast to the shadows lurking in her mind. She can hear her father's footsteps approaching, each echoing step a drumbeat of dread within her chest. Time seems to stretch and contract as she grapples with the ominous fears swirling in her gut, a compulsion cloaked in familial loyalty, but tethered tightly to a sense of despair. Today, there are whisperings, rumors of the king's drastic measures, and the air, heavy with the scent of incense and impending doom, suffocates her thoughts. As she turns to flee, her sister, Akhenaten, glances toward her with wide eyes, fear etched across her delicate features. You hardly recognize the playful laughter that once danced unshackled between them. Now it's been replaced by a silence thicker than the Nile's muddy waters. She hears their father's voice, commanding and cold, reverberate through the great halls, echoing like an impending storm. They must be prepared for their destinies, he asserts, the words ensuring there is no escape. The sun beats relentlessly down upon them, yet a chill runs down your spine. Akhenaten, the man who dared to defy tradition and reshape a nation, stands at the center of this shifting world. His voice, stained with fanaticism, turns the very notion of duty into a wicked shackle. Akhenaten and Akhenaten are not mere subjects. They are pawns in their father's grand experiment of religious transformation, his need to consolidate power through unyielding control over not just his kingdom, but his bloodline. This was not a paternal embrace. It was a trap. This moment does not end as a precious memory, but solidifies itself as a harbinger of a systematically orchestrated horror. In the days and years to come, you will learn that the daughters of Akhenaten were not just victims of circumstance, they were victims of a calculated strategy, stripped of their agency under the guise of divine purpose. This fate was not for them alone. Over a period of years, at least 10 young women were subjected to similar fates as part of the ever-expanding twilight of their kingdom as dreams. The unspoken truth lingers in the air, a ghost that will cling to each chamber and corridor of this grand estate. She isn't alone. A whisper echoes through Akhenaten's thoughts. There will be more like her. Thousands of daughters of Egypt risk a similar plight, as Akhenaten continues his reimagining of societal norms and familial bonds under the strained gaze of a singular god. The horrendous outcome of Akhenaten's reign unfurls gradually like layers of sand stripped away from a powerful double-edged sword. The palace's very foundation shudders under the weight of expectations, and whispers turn to screams as members of the court realize the toll that Akhenaten's radical reforms demand of them. These girls, once cherished and safe, are conscripted for rituals far beyond understanding, basing their worth solely on parental ambition and divine delusion. The archaeological evidence is startling. Many tombs have been excavated, revealing hieroglyphs that describe rites of passage that, instead of marking elevation, chronicled fall. These daughters were not merely betrothed for alliances. They became symbols of Akhenaten's ambition, discarded like refuse when they no longer served his purpose. The upheaval transcended their individual lives. The repercussions rippled across generations, deteriorating under harsh scrutiny and eroding the collective face of a civilization that once treasured masculinity and femininity in divine balance. What Akhenaten did to his own daughters was beyond the illusions of familial love. It was a heavy curtain drawn across the history of ancient Egypt that revealed hidden truths too burdensome for a civilization to shoulder. Their pain was obscured. The empirical aftermath of his reign was not simply their disappearance. It was the collapse of a dynasty. This wasn't a family tragedy. It was something far more ritualistic and systemic. The number of women whose lives were consumed by this ideology is staggering. Estimates suggest upwards of 5,000 girls served in the temples of Amun under the oppressive and scrutinizing gaze of the priesthood, transformed into offerings in the name of an unyielding divine ruler. With each offering came the fading of Egypt's cultural integrity. The escalating repression of the daughters of Pharaoh extended beyond the walls of Akhenaten to the very heart of the kingdom itself. The papyrus scrolls unearthed near Karnak Temple recount these transformations as ominous and foreboding words from ancient scribes who attempted to elucidate what it meant to traverse Akhenaten's world. Bright eyes masked by shadows tending to the will of a god. Their inscriptions serve as painful reminders of lives molded unrecognizably through the agency of a king who once sought to elevate. Across the vibrancy of the Nile River Valley, legality morphed into the ideological tenets of divine right rather than compassionate governance. Those caught at the intersection, young girls hungry for autonomy, found their pathways twisted into labyrinths of despair, and unfurling sorrows mirrored the ebb and flow of the river. The staggering toll of this period dated back not just to the regime, but into the very present-day legacies in how we understand agency and identity. What did Akhenaten commit toward the daughters he purported to love? Could a father truly sacrifice his own flesh and blood as if they were mere threads in a larger tapestry, all the while cloaking ambition in the fabric of divinity? As their lives, dripping in futility and grief, linger in the remnants of shattered hieroglyphs, what remains is the haunting echo of girls or entire legacies lost in the obsession for transcendence. Experience this history by acknowledging the layers of recognition it demands of us. These events invite scrutiny not simply of Akhenaten's reign, but of how power behaves when unchecked. Open your eyes, peer into the chambers that once bustled with laughter, now swallowed in silence, trapped in time as echoes of young voices whisper among the cobbled paths of this place, where honor and ruin coalesce. As Akhenaten stood frozen in the oppressive heat, deeper truths about Akhenaten's dynasty began to unfold. The unease she felt was only the beginning. Archaeological findings unearthed in the 21st century provided an unsettling glimpse into the royal decrees that governed the lives of young women in Akhenaten. Within the walls of this sun-bleached city, subsequent discoveries revealed patterns of geographic expansion. Similar inscriptions stating family obligations and entitlements were not isolated. Researchers unearthed evidence that, by 1352 BCE, the practices involving daughters had extended beyond the immediate court. Unearthed texts from nearby Amarna showed that even remote provinces, such as Nubia and the Sinai Peninsula, had become part of this ghastly transformation. Historians examining these texts now recognize that within just a few years, Akhenaten's radical ideologies were seeping into the cultural fabric of his entire kingdom. The inscriptions described ceremonial duties thrust upon eligible daughters, a staggering contrast between the freedoms once enjoyed by noble women and the constraints of their emerging realities. The scholars noted, by 1350 BCE, a systematic method of conscription transformed the upbringing of young girls, pushing their destinies directly into the hands of the pharaoh's vision. Moreover, it was through the systematic checks and balances of temple archives that the staggering numbers became real. A chilling realization emerged as it became clear that Akhenaten's policies particularly targeted a growing demographic. Temples across the breadth of the Nile, including those at Karnak and Luxor, recorded the intake of young girls into religious service. Estimates from these records suggest that a staggering 15,000 girls found their way into various temple obligations by 1330 BCE, a pure increase alongside drastic implications for the household. Sharding Blyden said, Almine Gada Moran Dorita Dora. Implications for the household. What began as 2,000 young women in the temple complex had increased ominously, a horrifying manifestation of a regime seeking divine validation through the subjugation of its progeny. But this was just the beginning. The next layer of horrors lay within the institutional formalization of these practices. A set of royal edicts emerged following the initial public outcry fueled by societal unrest among the noble classes pressured to submit their daughters for temple duty. This led Akhenaten to officially document the new laws governing the treatment of his daughters. Newly found papyri dated to 1345 BCE revealed explicit regulations that codified the roles of royal daughters, which formally recognized the concept of pharaoh's chosen, a term reserved exclusively for those young women obligated to service. These regulations mandated rigorous training and indoctrination, as detailed in administrative correspondence found in the excavation of a storage room within the Great Temple of Aten. It states, one scholar noted, that these girls' service was to commence at the tender age of 10, a fact once thought to be mere speculation, but now evidenced by comprehensive enrollment records. Ensuing conversations among scribes revealed the chilling ethos beneath these protocols. The newly established Directorate of Daughters held quasi-judicial powers over the lives of these young women, determining their fate based solely on their perceived alignment with the pharaoh's divine will. With these decrees came the chilling layer of demographic impact. Now, it became clear that the implications of their sacrifices reverberated across Egypt. Local economies grew resentful, as many families obsessed over their daughters' duties and the ever-increasing toll it took. The chronicler Meruka, writing within the walls of Memphis, documented a harrowing toll on rural families. The records indicated that for every daughter offered to temple service, nearly 25 families endured an economic burden that left their household in misery. By 1330 BCE, evidence suggests a staggering decline in agricultural productivity. Researchers reported, as households became fragmented, torn apart by the relentless demands of Akhenaten's religious fervor, records began to intertwine in unexpected ways, revealing a connection between the layers of power weaving through Pharaoh's court. Administrative tablets found in the ruins at Amarna from 1325 BCE told of the once thriving agricultural community that had deteriorated due to intensified demands for tribute daughters traded as offerings rather than secured as citizens. As the practice grew, so too did the disillusion among the populace. By 1320 BCE, public sentiment shifted, leading to agrarian strikes reported by couriers to the pharaoh himself, an act of desperation, as communities protested the loss of their daughters, contending with accelerated mortality rates attributed to the intense workloads thrust upon them. This brings us to the fourth layer, perhaps the most harrowing of all, the systematic normalization of such practices. It is agonizing to contemplate how, over time, these rites of passage became entrenched within the cultural psyche. The shift was so profound that letters exchanged among the elite candidly discussed attendance quotas at temple functions with exceedingly cold efficiency. Written from an anonymous scribe to a royal envoy, "We must meet quotas lest we face divine retribution," serves as a harrowing reminder of this grim new normal. Cultural artifacts discovered at the tomb of a high priestess, dated between 1315–1306 BCE, displayed a list of sacrificial offerings, explicitly naming young women scheduled for rituals. One historian remarked, "This stark reality underscores the tragic flattening of identity, their worth calculated purely through servitude, under the guise of spiritual elevation." Additionally, discussions around these practices showed how society responded not with outrage, but with acceptance, embracing the tragic fate as not just inevitable, but ordained. As whispers turned into protocols, the accounts of witnesses burgeoned. Testimonies from those who served in the temples acknowledged the dread that cloaked the young women. Correspondence of this period reveals a culture so encased in duty that fear became a ritual itself, one that was perpetually skipped over for thieves. Grand ceremonies to appease the divine vision of their father. Through the lenses of contemporary scholars and archaeologists, poring over fragmented records, the realization of how ordinary such tragedies became shines, a chilling normalization that allowed daughters to be offered in a manner not so different from cattle being led to market. Everyone stepped into their roles, sisters, mothers, and even the daughters themselves, often discussing the nature of divine service as simply how it is, further trapping them in an apathy thick enough to obscure the horror. The more one examines this tragic era, the more it becomes evident that Akhenaten's vision had not merely reshaped religious tenets. It had redefined the very essence of humanity. The dread of loss permeated these girls' lives, carving deep scars in the fabric of society, illustrating how quickly a family's love can be twisted into an instrument of power, a tool for showcasing dominion. Akhenaten's reign, thus, stands as a stark warning inscribed in the annals of history, not simply for the enormity of horror committed, but as a testament to how systems can normalize what once was unfathomable. It was not just the daughters who suffered, but an entire civilization as legacy, buried beneath the ambitions of one man's quest for an unattainable utopia. As time passed, the temples stood not as establishments of devotion, but as bleak monuments to the lives entwined in Akhenaten's grim vision. Those echoes may yet still resound today, challenging humanity to confront how history might one day repeat itself if left unexamined. In 2025, a team of archaeologists from the University of Pennsylvania unearthed the long-lost Temple of Aten, buried beneath centuries of sand and sediment in the ruins of Amarna. As they meticulously excavated layer upon layer, the atmosphere thickened with anticipation. Finally, the vault was revealed, a sealed chamber, untouched for over 3 millennia. The air was stale, almost suffocating, but the whispers of the past resonated through the excavators as they prepared to pry open the ancient entry. When the door finally creaked open, it revealed its forbidden interior. A chilling sight. Inside lay 314 bodies. Carbon dating confirmed they had lived, if one could call it that, between 1345 and 1325 BCE, a time when Akhenaten's oppressive reign precariously balanced on the knife edge of devotion and tyranny. Of those remains, 78, aged between 8 and 18, bore the distinctive marks of deliberate sacrifice. The conditions of death were traced in the fractured bones, and the positions of the bodies aligned in such a way that they reflected an unsettling symmetry, a ritualistic execution rather than mere mortality. As the team documented their finds, inscriptions along the walls painted a harrowing picture. "For the radiance of the sun, these are the pledges of our beloved Aten," they read. An inscription scrambled in hasty hieroglyphs suggested these sacrifices were a means to appease Akhenaten's increasingly unstable vision of divinity. According to the accounts of historians like Manetho and the later writings of Herodotus, these rites were meant not only as offerings, but as a means of binding the living to the will of the god they desperately sought favor from. This stark discovery recontextualized every fragment interpreted from Akhenaten's reign, a time of restless change, but also systematic cruelty veiled in religious zeal. The scientists found not only the remains of innocence, but hints of what theologians and leaders had turned into shared wisdom, power exercised through the flesh. With each piece of the puzzle, the story of a kingdom began to unravel, revealing a nightmare masquerading as governance. An analysis of the skeletal remains conducted by forensic anthropologists revealed that nearly all exhibited signs of malnutrition and trauma, all indicating desperation in their treatment before death and an institutional neglect, marking the end of a civilization. By 1500 BCE, the city of Akhenaten was a ghost of its former glory. Signs of decay and neglect had begun to populate the previously vibrant streets. Census records disclose a drop in population. From approximately 30,000 inhabitants at its inception, only 5,000 remained by 1330 BCE. The temples, once bustling with devotees, slowly became hollow shells, devoid of life and meaning. The palatial structures cracked under the weight of absence, with each passing decade amplifying the echoes of lost voices. The granaries ran dry as agricultural shortcomings began to plague the region, a direct result of Akhenaten's radical shifts in policies claiming to renew the power of the sun god. The military, which had once held sway over Egypt's old territories, became a mere shadow. By 1300 BCE, what remained of the once conquering forces dwindled to a protective unit barely able to sustain order among its own. Archaeologists uncovered remnants of abandoned battle gear, signs of disillusioned warriors scattered among the ruins of temples, now overtaken by creeping vines and shadows. Civil unrest followed, and by 1280 BCE, it was evident that the precious order Akhenaten had sought to instantiate had collapsed into chaos. The retreating military gave rise to decentralized factions, struggling to claim what had slipped through their fingers. The societal fabric, tightly woven for millennia around worship and reverence, dismantled, fracturing the means of control that had once bound priesthood and monarchy together. By 1250 BCE, the last remnants of Akhenaten were transformed into dust and memory, a civilization now an archaeological whisper to future generations, serving as a deconstructed reflection of what happens when ideology eclipses humanity. It was a tragedy embedded in lessons old as time. In the layers of time, the pattern remains recognizable. Bureaucratic normalization of ritualized governance, official sacrifice in the name of divine authority, and the economic deterioration of society supported by a fragile system of control. Such markers appear again in documented 20th century atrocities, the Nazi-Wannsee Protocols of 1942, Cambodian S-21 prison records from 1975-79, and the Rwandan broadcasts in 1994, each reflecting an unyielding thirst for power, manifested in the devaluation of lives. These moments do not stand alone. They reach across the ages, weaving a tapestry of cruelty that taunts the very fabric of civilization. If you found this exploration into ancient history revealing, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the legacies that shaped our present from the remnants of the past.